morning and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to our panel today. My name is Elizabeth Lakes, and I'm the Director of Solutions Consulting at Forder in EMEA. So let's get started. The agenda. Thanks, everybody. We'll get to the main part of the presentation in a moment. We'll also have time for a Q&A at the end, so make sure that you do get your questions in and we can get them answered by this wonderful panel that we have. Again, thank you so much for being here. We can't do this without you. It's all about what you guys do and bring to the community. And thank you to all of our panelists as well for being members of the PreSales Collective. To get the most out of today's webinar, ask questions in the Q&A as mentioned before and be active in the chat. We want this to be really interactive and for everyone to learn from each other and from the panelists here. Just to give a bit of context, so this webinar is for career pivoters and also for people who are interested in learning more about the interview process and breaking it down into manageable steps. With us today, we have pre-sales professionals who hire, train, and manage career pivoters, as well as some who have pivoted into the role themselves. So we really hope that this webinar gives you a sense of what to expect and empowers you in the next interview that you have in the pre-sales profession. So with that, let's go ahead and do a round of introductions for our panelists today. Let's go ahead and start with you, Allison. Can you tell us a little bit about your current role, where you're based, what your purview is in your role, and how long you've been in the pre-sales profession?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Allison. I'm actually in product marketing now with a company called Zora, and I have been in pre-sales for about a decade. So my purview right now is actually taking what I know in terms of technical sales and applying it to marketing and being able to be the bridge between product management and basically our field. I'm based in Boston and kind of travel around a little bit, and that's kind of what I do on a daily basis.
Great, thanks, Allison. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. So my current role, I'm the Director of Sales Engineering for the Americas for Everbridge. That role is responsible basically for all the pre-sales activities that cover Canada down to the tip of South America. We have multiple teams that are responsible for covering everything from our mid-market SMB all the way up to our enterprise. So we have a couple of sales engineering teams that cover that, a couple of technical sales engineering teams that are solutions experts for specific products that we have. And then also the RFP and pre-sales security is part of my organization as well. So we basically, anything that's technical in pre-sales, we make sure that we are supporting our sales teams in getting that squared away. Personally, I'm based out of Austin, Texas. The company I work for is actually based out of Boston in the Northeast. And then as far as my history in pre-sales, I've been in pre-sales about 10 years. I am one of those pivoters. I was a high school chemistry teacher before I found my way into pre-sales as a first-time sales engineer, and kind of had a great journey within Everbridge. So we'll be happy to talk about some of that today.
Amazing. Thanks, Andy. And Rue, how about you? Your current role, where you're based, your purview, and how long you've been in pre-sales?
Yeah, great. So I'm Rue Dickinson. I work for Appian and director and based in the Pacific Northwest, so Seattle area, but cover basically the region, all of Washington and Oregon. I like to say I've been in pre-sales for about 12 years because prior to that, being in the pre-sales role, I was actually doing consulting, which was both heavy technical and also a good bit of pre-sales and selling additional solutions. So I would give advice for folks on the line right now. Even if your title isn't currently pre-sales, you may be doing pre-sales type things. So that's it. I'm just responsible for customers and technical accounts in the Pacific Northwest, and glad to be here to help people make the career pivot. I moved from engineering to consulting to pre-sales. So
awesome. Thank you all so much. So let's get started with a pretty high level question about what is the current interview process and what does it look like at your organization, and how long does it take to give people an idea of what to expect? Andy, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, gladly. So as far as our process, we try to keep it very clean for both our applicants, but also for us as a hiring team. And what we're really looking at are three main phases of interview process. Our first phase is really finding our pool of viable applicants, and so that's a couple activities go into that. We're looking at a lot of times we're doing some of the recruiting ourselves and trying to do some sourcing. Our HR teams to do that. And so once we, identify individuals that, reached out to, or they've reached out to us, we try to figure out if we have a good potential fit. So trying to have alignment with where that individual is in their career and what the position is, and everything sort of aligns from that standpoint. The second phase of things is really start at whether we think that the person, the applicant, is going to work well with our teams. And that second phase is usually a lot of hiring manager interviews, discussions with the hiring managers, and really trying to understand, do they have potential technical skills? Do they have the people skills? Do they have the experience? Can they tell good stories? Can they link to what's there? And then the third phase is our presentation phase, where we ask every single applicant to present a technical topic, preferably a demo on a solution. And so in that third phase, we're really trying to understand the presentation skills and how that person can hold an audience and can work their way through solving a problem during historically those were in-person presentations, but over the last couple of years, they've all been remote presentations.
Okay, great. And Allison, is it similar for you in terms of the interview process?
Yeah, I mean, it would look really similar. It takes about 3 to 6 weeks to do all those same things when you're interviewing for basically any type of position like this.
Okay, great. So if we build on that in this process, and I'll actually hand this over to Rue. How often are you looking for hiring non-traditional talent, or people that are not already in the industry, or not already in pre-sales, or maybe are not really that technical?
Yeah, so I'll give you this actually a perspective from sort of a candidate. You'll see a lot of outside recruiters actually doing recruiting and coming out and trying to find more and more pre-sales talent, because there's just a massive shortage. So I wouldn't say that I'm currently looking for non-traditional talent, but there's just so much need that I would never, ever say no to a non-traditional talent. And I think we might cover this a little bit later on, but it's, pre-sales is a very ambiguous term with a lot of different roles. Fundamentally, I'm just looking for two things. Like, do you have technical skills if you're selling a technical product in pre-sales? And then can you present well, which is what we screen for in the interviews. So if you can check those two boxes, I'm all for non-traditional talent. And I think a lot of folks, like teachers especially, like Andy just mentioned it, that's a great background for making a career switch, anything where you're working with other folks. So I see non-traditional talent all the time, and I wouldn't shy away from it in any way.
That's great. And maybe with some personal stories here, since you guys did successfully pivot into the career, how did you do that? What advice would you give people? And Rue, you can start, and then maybe Allison.
Yeah, so I'll say I'd like to share just one of the challenges that you will face is people will have a tendency to put you into your little box of what you used to be doing. And I came from a heavy engineering background. So, the stereotype is this guy doesn't know how to talk to people. He's just really in the weeds, can code away and do that kind of thing, but he probably isn't a good presenter. And I've had that challenge for most of my life, like having an engineering degree. I studied industrial engineering. So just kind of changing that mindset is really important, and just kind of identifying like what value do you bring and how can you articulate that to an employer. So for me, going from consulting in a pretty heavy tech background at Deloitte, I was always getting hit up by recruiters for more consulting positions. And I knew that I didn't want to have that. Eventually, I started to learn a little bit more about sales engineering and started to do a little discovery myself. And fortunately, Appian had come to me. And I had a great opportunity to take my engineering skills and talk about how they were beneficial to the team, because there's a lot of app dev, especially at the time, that was necessary for Appian. So, leveraging some of your existing skills and talking about how you can help the company that you're going to interview with, that's super helpful. And you have to have like a little bit of a base. So that's currently that's how I did it, was saying, hey, I've got the tech skills, and by the way, I know how to present as well, and demonstrating that throughout the interview process. So that's what helped me to make that transition.
Good advice, Allison.
Yeah, I'll echo what Rue just said. And actually, I really like his side of the story because he came from the technical background and I really came from the presenting background. And so you can get into it from both sides. And in fact, I've made 2 career pivots in my short career here. And the first is that I came from a music background where I was constantly using my analytical brain as well as my creative brain. And that's really one of the things that I kind of hinged on, to say like, no, I can do this. And look, I've already been on stage. I've been in front of people. I can do the presentation. And all I need is the opportunity to learn the technical side of your product, because I can do the analytical side and the design side and all of those things. So I would say that like my advice for folks when they're actually thinking about how do I position myself and make that transition is really kind of, well, number one, it takes a little bit of luck to get somebody that will listen to your story, but then it takes a lot of selling yourself and understanding how to tell your story and saying, these are my skills that I have, and these are how they transfer into what you're trying to do there. That's really how I've made it possible to change my career twice now.
That's an amazing story. I'm sure lots of people wouldn't think that, music and pre-sales would be an easy transition to make, but I think that's a really great example and highlighting the experience that you already have. In fact, like your experience being in front of audiences and being really creative are probably things that are much harder to teach than like learning how a solution works. So it should definitely give a lot of people on the call confidence if they feel like they're coming from a background that doesn't seem like it's very technical or relevant to pre-sales. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so next question that I'd like to ask is, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people interviewing for Essie roles across the board? And I'll let Andy take this one.
Yeah, so there's probably 2 things that I've seen a couple times over, and one of the big ones that I've seen is where somebody doesn't necessarily understand completely the organization, the industry that they're working with, and this can vault off of some of the other questions that are probably coming up as well as far as trying to understand where somebody's going to be the best fit. So if you're looking at a role that is highly focused on a specific industry, you're coming in with different expectations, or you haven't actually dug in and understand the problems that an organization is trying to solve, then sometimes it feels like there's a little bit of a misalignment in goals, right? And when that's the case, that can be difficult. So that's really like a little bit of a candidate, not necessarily number one doing research, but number two being true to themselves, right? As far as what possibly is going to be a good fit for them. And then one of the other ones, and this is one of the things I think probably drives candidates the most crazy, is sometimes from candidates you can get a feeling of lack of authenticity. Like, you're not talking to who that candidate actually is, right? You feel like you're getting a facade. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is, when somebody is being themselves and is showing a little bit of vulnerability, and it gets asked about a weakness or a weakness in a situation, and really thinks that that's a trap question and wants to turn it into how with whatever situation, that comes across sometimes as not being authentic. So for me personally, I want to see what somebody's learned, not how the weakness wasn't really a weakness necessarily, right? So trying to get a good understanding of who that person really is, And several conversations over the course of an interview, you start to understand and you start to get a real view into what's in. And so you can only fake it for so long during the process. So the biggest piece of advice on that side for me is to really be authentic and be who you are, because ultimately that's going to set both sets of people up for being the happiest in the long term.
That's great. So it was number one, make sure that you're prepared and you know what you're getting yourself into, you understand the organization, and two, be authentic. And I think both of those things have to be considered when you decide where to apply, right? Because you can only be authentic and do your research in places that you think that you're really going to fit into and that you're interested in. So when people are trying to get into pre-sales, how should they decide where to apply? What should they be aware of when choosing an industry or an organization? Allison, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things that I consider when I'm actually looking at evaluating a new role and a new company. The first is like what kind of clientele they serve. So you'll find folks that are really kind of looking for enterprise type of clients versus small and medium business. And that will change what your deals and your opportunities look like. So knowing the type of client you want to work with is key. The next thing is what kind of product is it? So that could be something that's a physical technology, like a device that you would have to demonstrate. It could be software, which is what I've spent my background in. But it could also be services, specifically like IT or managed services are pretty common. The next thing that I think about too are what are the product capabilities and the different partners and ecosystem that they work with. So how configurable is the product itself? If you were going to demonstrate it, are you going to spend a week creating a demo, or are you expected to like pick up and do that in half an hour? And like, what's the difference of, how much time you would spend preparing a demo? Because you may like something where you're doing the same thing or you're doing a very similar thing and just tweaking a few things, or you might like getting really deep into the weeds with something and designing a whole new solution. Those are two very different types of products and two very different types of companies usually. Then I also evaluate things like the team itself, what the makeup is, what opportunities might live beyond just that first job, as well as the company and its culture, what it feels like for a corporate citizenship, and also what its financial status is. So what is its goals? Does it seem stable? Has it just received funding, or has it just gone IPO'd? All those things are things that I evaluate when I'm thinking about taking a new position.
There are a lot of things to consider, clearly. And Andy or Rue, I'll give you guys an opportunity to add anything else that you want to about what you should consider when choosing which roles to apply to.
Yeah, so going back to the previous question, I think they're really closely linked. If going back to the previous question of how somebody who's a pivoter kind of fit that alternative talent. And one of the things that I've seen is it's kind of this 1 degree of separation, right? Like if you're moving from, my full story was moving from a teacher to a graduate program on educational software to then becoming a software sales engineer. There was no one huge jump. A lot of times there's lots of little jumps, and some of those little jumps can occur while it's happening. So that's one of the things that I would be thinking about is if I was looking to make a jump, and especially into sales. And the big question that typically comes up is, how is that person going to be able to relate to the potential prospects or potential clients of that organization? And having that 1 degree of separation helps tell that story really well. For example, for one of our solutions, we actually don't hire other sales engineers, DevOps engineers that have good presentation skills, because that product is so focused on selling to a certain persona. We need that relationship. So that's the thing I would think about is, how do I potentially relate and how do I potentially work with the people that we're going to be selling to? And that's the biggest question on that pivot piece.
Okay, great. So for someone, a career pivoter, right? They've decided they really want to get into pre-sales. they've now done their homework and they've looked at all the different companies and roles out there, and they finally decide to apply, and they get lucky enough to get the recruiter call. Okay, so in that recruiter call, what is the relationship between that recruiter and the hiring manager, and how can an interviewee leverage the recruiter call to their benefit? So Rue, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So the recruiters are usually aligned to a certain department. So they've talked to a lot of pre-sales engineers beforehand. In terms of how to stand out and how to kind of leverage that relationship and use it to your advantage in the process, you've got to realize like what the recruiter's after. The recruiter is a salesperson. Like there's really nothing else about it. They are a salesperson that is trying to get you to join the company. And so they are trying to place people. And when they find a good candidate, they will work for you. In fact, it was funny. Like I have an ex-recruiter, she was amazing. And I would always tell, like I knew her first impression of candidates because they were so much more prepared during the demo. And I think what she was doing is she was actually feeding them information about how to get by the interview as I'm going through things. So I would think of the recruiter position as one, like, treat it just like you would treat any other interview, but take an interest in them and try to, sell yourself, but talk about how you can really benefit the company. And then, don't just think of them as a gatekeeper. Because like I said, like, Kim, it was hilarious the amount of times that she would go and have this awesome candidate and she'd be like telling me all the good things and like selling me before I even meet this person. So I already have a great favorable impression. So I would think about that. Like, look, they're not as technical. They're not going to want to know like in the weeds specifics of things that you've done. They can't relate to the role in that regard. But, I think the relationship and you being authentic and human is really, really valuable in getting them to be an advocate for you, because it makes the subsequent interviews that Andy mentioned a heck of a lot easier when they're on your side.
Great. And continuing on with that, Allison, how can a career pivoter make a great first impression with that recruiter?
I think the thing that I think about is making sure that you have kind of your story in the back of your head about why you're going to fit and fill a gap for them. Part of it is like kind of knowing what they need, and that's what you're going to find out from the recruiter. But having 3 to 4 bullet points you can kind of pull out from every single time that you talk to a recruiter about how you fit a technical need, how you fit a presentation need, or maybe it's a experiential need that they have that they don't have on their team today. Having something like that at your fingertips and ready to use is really going to help you to answer those questions that maybe are a little bit more nebulous, like tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so if they say tell us about yourself, you should answer with that. Exactly, like what the gap that you're going to fill and the value you're going to bring. Is that your advice?
Yeah, I mean, my advice for that question in particular is actually to be like, well, with respect for your time, what's the most interesting thing for me to talk about? Because you could go off in a bunch of different tangents. And that's actually like a trick that we would do in pre-sales and discovery calls as well, which is like you have an open-ended question, then you probe a little bit further, and then only at the end of it do you provide a solution. So you don't provide the solution, which is yourself, until you know what the question is that they're actually asking.
Fair. And if I can keep calling on you, as a comparison, how do you make a great impression on the hiring manager? So if you get past that recruiter is like Rue's recruiter and is telling him how great you are already, how do you then make the impression on the hiring manager?
Yeah, so I think about that as being able to show how you can creatively solve the problem that they're trying to solve. And incorporate that into the discussion that you're having with that hiring manager, and really showing them that you've done your research, like Andy said and Rue said, doing your research on the company, knowing that this is something that they do, and I want to ask them about how they approach their clients in this type of space. All of those things are things that show that you've done your homework, you really are interested in this company and the position, and you're willing to kind of creatively find solutions with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add one to that one.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Elizabeth. I was gonna say, like, with the recruiter, the difference is obviously they're not in as they're not in as in the weeds with the role. The hiring manager, they probably have a ton of experience. So if I'm like interviewing with Andy, let's take an example here, and I'm coming from a different background, I would like the way I see a lot of value when I'm interviewing folks is when they're both humble but also confident and like, look, I don't know pre-sales as well as, you know, Andy does, let's say, and having that self-awareness and being clear that like I want to learn from you, but also having the confidence to not sell yourself short and be like, well, I've never done this before, so I don't know how I can help you. So it's being confident that your skills are what Andy needs, but also humble enough to realize that, hey, I'm going to be going through this. This is a learning process. Like I've never done this job, as we're talking about career pivoters here. So don't walk in and, you know, think you're going to be the best pre-sales engineer there is when you've never done the job before, because it's just not going to happen.
So you're looking for some self-awareness
Yeah,
to an extent.
certainly.
Yeah, very good. And coachability. Okay, so we've got the recruiter interview, hiring manager interview, maybe a few other interviews along the way. A big part of the pre-sales interview process is the panel. So Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about what that process looks like for your company and how someone can set themselves up for success?
Yeah, I can talk about how you can set yourself up for success because I've had a lot of those. And I can also talk about how some people have not set themselves up for success. So what I will say is that final interview, that presentation demo is by far the most important stage of everything that we do. We have had candidates that, you know, were barely made it through the other phases that maybe we had some concerns about, and then absolutely propelled themselves to getting an offer presentation. And we've had many with the opposite situation as well, where their interviews were amazing. We were very excited about it, and then things fell absolutely flat during that presentation. At Everbridge, we give a very simple formula of what we're looking for in that presentation, and we let the candidate use any solution that they want to do a demonstration. So they kind of set the battlefield per se. They get to kind of set things up in their favor. We ask them to structure a presentation in a way to say, hey, you guys, you've already done some discovery with us. We want you to start with a rehab discovery, move into the presentation, and then wrap it up. So what we provide some very clear criteria of what we're looking for in order to make it as simple as possible. The biggest scene where people have or have not been successful has been 110% in the preparation. We always offer the chance to do a dry run with one of the hiring managers before doing the presentation to the larger group. And, you know, we've had people turn that down and be successful. But I can tell you anybody that has taken that offer up has certainly been successful. So if you don't get that offer for a dry run, I would ask for it. To me, that would be the biggest, hugest green flag in the world that I could possibly get from a candidate. What we're actually looking for is how a candidate would actually approach a real prospect in a real situation. And you absolutely can't real because we're in a, you know, laboratory type environment with this here. But what you can do is try to make that authentic as possible. And what you would do with your champion at an organization, if you had to present to their C-level executive that was going to sign off on a project, you just say to that champion, hey, can we do a dry run in the presentation before we meet with your CFO to get approval for this project? And if they were actually on your side, percent would say, yeah, absolutely, let's run through it, make sure that this is going to work out the way that we want to. So we're giving all of our candidates the opportunity to do that. And as part of that, we've definitely made some course corrections before the big presentation. Every organization is probably looking for something that's a little bit different out of that presentation. So it's your job to do discovery and figure out exactly what they're looking for. Whether you get a one-liner saying, hey, yeah, give us a demo of your favorite product, to a full outline of what they expect that presentation to look like. It's your job to dig in and learn as much about that, do a dry run and everything that's there. That's what we would expect if you're having what I like to call the meeting with one of your prospects, is that. So that's how we're looking for it. Candidates that have interviewed great and have come with a great resume and a great background and everything else have fallen flat on their face during this phase of things because they did not put in that same level. They thought they already had it in the bag with some of their earlier stages. So for me, nailing that's one of the most important things. There was one question in the chat from Joseph asking, hey, I had a final round where I had to present their product after 3 days prep time. I would be suspect of that personally. I would push back on that. I'd say, hey, within 3 days, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to give you the presentation. Can we have a dry run? Maybe we can do the dry run in 3 days and then schedule the follow-up the week after. If somebody's setting you up for failure, it's one of two things. One, they're playing games with you to see if you push back. I personally, I don't like that, but it might just be part of what they're looking at, is to see what your personality is like when you're put in a situation that isn't favorable. And the other thing is, I don't like to have people present our product to us, because we know our product, we know the value points, and if you have a little bit different things align, then I'm not, it's not fair to the candidate in order for them to put their best foot forward with that. We've done that 1 or 2 times, and they've typically been users of our product that have interviewed for a job with us. And we've had that a couple times, and we've hired a couple people that have done that, but they already had lots of experience with our product, and what they're doing is kind of selling their implementation of our services back to us, which worked out pretty well. But I would not ask somebody to do that blindly.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what you said earlier. Ask for the dry run. I think that's a great piece of advice for people. This part of the interview process is probably the most daunting, even for people who are experienced in pre-sales. And I think everyone should do that. It's important to know that, like, hearing from these hiring managers, it's in our best interest that you do well. No one wants time wasted, so they're on your side. If they're not willing to give you that time, it is sort of a red flag. So don't hesitate to ask. I do think this is an important part of the interview process, and maybe something that career pivoters wouldn't necessarily have experience in. So Rue, do you have anything else that you want to advise the audience on for this particular part of the interview process?
Yeah, I'd say the sort of like a tactical thing that I see a lot in that presentation is, I had a great VP of Essie's kind of explain to me, he's like, when I walk into any presentation, I imagine that everyone is kind of floating around in outer space, and I need to ground them and grab them and put them back on earth. Like, this is exactly where you are. This is your role. This is what I'm going to be talking to you about. And it's really important, like, up front, to make it really clear what you're going to lead them through. What I frequently see is you can just get right into the presentation, and we don't really know why we're there. We don't know why we're sitting there. Like, I'm confused. I've never seen this product before. So, like, grounding in my mind is probably the single biggest thing that I work with sales engineers on doing a better job of, is like, just start it off right. And if we know where we're going, we'll ask questions. If you don't do that, everyone in the audience feels stupid because they don't know where they are. So then they're nervous about even asking a question, because they're like, am I an idiot? Or like, was I just not told where I am? So I would focus a ton of attention on, right in the beginning, make sure you ground them. You tell them exactly where you're going with the presentation. And I like when that happens, it can be not that exciting of a presentation. And I'm still in because this person is a leader. They led me to where they want to go to. So that would be my number one thing to do when it comes to that presentation.
Like a tell, show, tell is what I like.
Oh, yes. Demo to win. That's my Bible right there.
There you go. Another resource for career pivoters. I also use Demo to Win, so it's clearly a lot of people know it. So maybe we'll post that in the chat for people to refer to. Okay, so throughout this process, so it can be a lengthy process. Throughout this, how does a career pivoter advocate for themselves, Allison?
Yes, I would say every step of the way be listening for what the hiring manager is looking for and what they actually need. Sometimes the job description is not complete. It might not tell you everything that the hiring manager is actually looking for. And they will reveal what they need as they're giving you information about the company. And then you figure out, how am I uniquely qualified to fill that gap, and talk to those things. The thing that I would say you can do, which will be an advocate activity, I guess, for yourself, is always ask for feedback. So I do this even when I get a, oh, thanks, but no thanks type of email. It's like, I appreciate that that's your decision, but can you tell me what was the reason? And some places will, and some places will not give you feedback. But every time you get feedback, you can incorporate it into, how do I make myself a stronger candidate in the future?
Okay, so if you're doing well in the process, can you still ask the recruiter or ask the hiring manager at each step? Can you ask them for feedback, and how would you do that?
100%, and I absolutely would, especially the recruiter first. And then if you feel like you had a really good connection with a hiring manager and you're preparing for that, the panel discussion or the presentation, I absolutely would say, I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times with dry runs. I would say, like, here's what I'm thinking. Can we walk through this together? And even getting that extra time that maybe another candidate didn't ask for will get you that much closer to a yes.
Great, thanks. Okay, we want to answer that question since we're on the topic that just went in the chat. Like, would you wait till the end of the interview or do it during?
So it depends. It's hard to say yes or no to that. To me, it really depends on what's the vibe that you have with this person you're talking with. And do they seem like they're doing a really formal evaluation process, kind of like an RFP, which is, a very locked down and formulaic type of process? Or is it more casual? If it's more casual, I would absolutely ask for feedback on the actual call itself. If it is more formal, I probably would end up waiting for a thank you email, reiterating, I really love this process. I'm trying to get better all the time. Would love to hear what you think I can do better in the next round.
Okay, awesome. So we've gone through the process. Let's say that all of your tips work and a career pivoter gets their dream job. When you get a career pivoter, how is their onboarding different, or how would you tailor that to somebody who may be new to the field? Rue, do you want to answer that one?
I'll start, but I think Andy's the best one on this. I'll just say something that wasn't immediately apparent to me prior to getting into the pre-sales profession. People will think of sales as very cutthroat. There's some truth to that. I would say in the interview process, though, we are all rooting for you. We really don't like doing interview after interview after interview. So we really want to hire you. So just keep that in mind. We want this to work out. And then once you come on board, now we really want you to be successful. So we're going to recognize the best coach, and usually the people in leadership positions will identify where is my student, if you will, weak, and where are they strong, and what am I going to have to develop in order to make sure it's not a weakness or limitation. I would train someone there was a question about having an engineering background. Like, I'm not going to focus on any technical skills for someone who comes in with an engineering background, but I'm going to work on presentation skills a ton because they probably haven't done it as much. So like, ultimately, like, we are on your side, and I'll let Andy talk about it a little bit more, but like, yeah, we're not working against you. Like, if you're not successful, we're not successful. So it's in our best interest.
Yeah. So we have the time invested. It takes, time to find a candidate. It takes time to interview a candidate. It takes time to go through the HR hiring part of a candidate, and it takes 90 days to do some basic training for a new hire. So Rue's absolutely correct. We have, by the time we're getting to that point, we got at least 6 months invested, and that means that if we have not the right person, that means invested that didn't get us where we needed, and it impacts the business negatively. So, as far as that onboarding, number one, as a candidate, you should be asking about onboarding. That's one of the best questions I get, is talk to me about the onboarding process. But number two, when it comes to treating onboarding differently, really what we do is we make sure we're doing more demoing. We make sure that more checks for understanding along the way, where it's like, hey, we've learned this part of the product, let's see you demo it. Now let's see you apply it to solving a problem. Now let's see you able to build out a demo environment and document that. So absolutely, having an organization is mature and understands their onboarding process and has the resources available. I'd ask about, what's it going to look like so that I can get some of that real world experience in a safer environment. Am I going to be assigned a buddy? Am I going to be somebody who's my dedicated trainer? What's all that look like? Those are the questions that are going to lead to if you're going to be set up for success or not. I'd say the good, this is one of the things that they do extremely well and have a very good attitude about how they approach this. Other organizations, and I'll be honest, when I first joined where I am today, it was more or less hey, go listen to some of this guy's demos and play with your demo environment and figure it out. We don't do it that way anymore. We have a very good structure around it, and so it kind of goes both ways. You need to understand how you're going to be supported, but also think about what you can bring to that process as well, as far as making sure that that's working both ways. Because coming from a high school chemistry teacher background, sat in the room and said, all right, teach me, and there were kids who were always looking for thing, right? And that's the same thing with adults, right? The ones that have jumped off the field and grown quickly within the organization are the ones that were self-starters, and the ones that were curious and wanted to learn new things, and the ones that we almost had to sometimes even slow down at times to help them kind of, they had a good understanding of what's there. And so that motivation over to onboarding process, and it's really the responsibility of both parties to make sure that set up for success, but then executing on it as well.
Well, thank you all so much. Those are all of my questions. So let's get to some audience questions. So we have a few already that we've gotten. While I'm asking those, please don't hesitate to add more into that Q&A function. So the first thing is, let's actually go back a little bit to before you even do the interview. What are some key things to highlight on your resume if you're trying to pivot into a solutions engineering role? And maybe Allison, you can tell us what you did when you came from being a musician.
Yes, I mean, I think you need to identify what are the skills that you have already and that you are really confident in, and play into those, as well as figuring out what are the things that the jobs that I'm applying for need, and are there any things that I've done either in an actual professional role or outside of a professional role which has given me those skills, and I could then add them to my resume. So when I was first starting out moving into technology, I used both an experiential resume as well as a functional resume, and the difference being that One lists your jobs and what you did at the jobs, and the other one lists your skills. And maybe it's not even chronological, but you're actually talking about, I've done these things, and here's how I can apply them to that role. So I've used both of those before, interchangeably, depending on what role I was actually applying for.
Excellent. And Rue, we have a question for you. The audience wants to know a little bit more about your engineering background, what you're doing, and what made you want to eventually pivot to consulting and then solutions engineering.
Yeah, so this is good because actually there was another question in the chat kind of similar to this one. So Pranali, I'll hopefully address this as well on top of that. But I just went into, I mean, I'll give you the quick story. I was really good at math and science, so everyone told me to become an engineer. I went into engineering. I came out and did work in a manufacturing plant as an industrial engineer. I loved industrial engineering and I hated that job. Like, it was terrible. And I think it was just like, there wasn't enough variety for me. And it was all about, you know, eking out more efficiency on the assembly line, which was not the thing for me. So I decided to move into consulting, but I was working for Deloitte and I went like heavy engineering, true software development type role. So I was really just a coder, even though I was employed by a consulting company. Why I moved to more of a consulting sort of functional role, as they like to call it in the industry, is because the things that drive me are human relationships, interacting with people, and then problem solving. And I could do sort of both of those things. Why I eventually went into pre-sales is because I wanted to get more of that human interaction, more demos, more like ideation and kind of identifying the problem and helping come up with a potential solution, but then someone else implement it. So Pranali had asked, like, you know, another question around, you know, what are the differences between pre-sales engineering and then like true engineering, and, you know, what kind of makes that a good fit. You have to realize when you're leaving engineering or consulting or a doing profession, you have to give up this idea that like you're going to do things to completion, because in pre-sales, you're no longer doing that. So if you're the type of person that likes the details and like finishing out the last 20% of the project and fixing the bugs and that kind of thing, then pre-sales might not be a good spot for you. However, if you're cool with it being like 80% good enough so that the client is like, okay, this makes sense, we can rely on the implementation team to do it, then pre-sales may be a good fit for you. I personally hate mundane. That's why I don't like the assembly line. That's why pre-sales was so perfect for me, because it allowed me to get 80% of the way there, build that vision, and be interacting with people in the process, which is what drives me as a human. And then, you know, the best people I work with are the professional services team, because they're more detail oriented. Like, they will worry about every little edge case and they will round off the edges. So kind of that's how I made my transition over time. And I think kind of what sparked it for me was just the realization that, like, I don't want to be behind the keyboard for 6 months on a project. I'd rather be in front of people, you know, once, twice a week, maybe like 5 or 10 times a week. And it's dependent on the activity, but that's where you're going to get for pre-sales. I'd say, like, in general, if you like interacting with people, I think pre-sales is a good profession. If you don't, I don't think it's a good profession. And if you're somewhere in the middle, then it's up to you. But don't think that it's only for extroverts, because there's plenty of awesome introverts in pre-sales that really like giving demos. So I would think about that when you're making that transition.
Just to pile on the encouragement there, I actually did hire a software engineer last year into my team. And one of the main differences that they noticed at first was the difference between always having this constant backlog and this is what you're going to achieve this week and tick, 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 versus pre-sales is like, it's almost like running your own business. It's like you're kind of managing yourself. There's a lot of autonomy and no one is going to come like measure you by the number of hours you did XYZ, which I love. And I think that this person learned to love it and he's very successful at it, but just something to be aware of. Maybe just a final word. Rue, do you want to share another success story of a career pivoter that you've had on your team or you've experienced?
Yeah, so I can think of a couple. Actually, I had one that came from the BDR role. So for business development, sales development, for those who don't know the lingo, it's basically the person who's picking up the phone and trying to get leads and literally cold calling people and sending emails. So she had, that was her experience. Prior to that, she was actually an opera major, incredible voice. And she wanted to get into pre-sales. And I actually interviewed her and I talked to her about it. And we had an associate role opening up, which we don't look for really much experience. We hire, direct out of college usually. And, I told her in that interview, and I was like, well, look, like you're a risk, you come from a non-traditional background, but I think if you're interested enough in this, like you can make this happen, because she was very successful in the prior role. She just had the passion. So the thing that, like, when I told her that, I didn't realize like how hard that hit her until it's probably a year and a half later. And she's getting this award, and she came up to me like not long after. This was like a couple of days afterwards, and she goes, like, when you interviewed me, I was really happy that you were on my side, but you told me that I was a risk. And she's like, I don't think I'm a risk anymore. And I'm like, I almost am like, I'm like ready to like tear up, because I was like, I can't believe she remembered that, because I don't even remember saying it. And she did such an amazing job, and she's an incredible solution consultant. But that's where she was just coming from, that different background. And if you want it bad enough, like you can do it. You got to put in the work, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, the panelists, for answering the questions. Thank you for the audience. You guys have been so engaged. We're going to go ahead and get to the final bit of our presentation. So the last group to thank is Consensus, because they are our sponsors today. Consensus is an intelligent demo automation software that was built to help scale pre-sales. They're used by leading companies in a variety of industries to bring prospects to live demos, better educated and ready to talk specifics about products. No one likes doing unqualified demos, right? So let them educate themselves. And using Consensus, your sales engineering team builds a library of reusable interactive video demos that sales sends out on demand. Consensus can automatically personalize the experience and track engagement, and this reduces unqualified demos to near zero and can double your pre-sales team's productivity. So the growth and statistics validate this approach, the two most impressive being that almost 3 million stakeholders discovered through the use of automated demos by sales, and the average cost of demo when you compare the automated to the price of having your team delivering live demos. If you'd like to see an automated demo for yourself, check them out at goconsensus.com. And the final thing, get involved, continue to engage with us, join the Slack channel. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate your time today. And this is the next event that you can look forward to. Hope to see you all there.